My child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you by accident. Do not rush past this message. Something has unfolded behind closed doors, something your heart has been sensing without being able to explain. While you were trying to remain strong, while you were wondering whether this connection still mattered to the one you love, your soulmate sat before their family and spoke about you with an emotion they could no longer hide. Their voice trembled. Their carefully guarded walls began to fall. And before that conversation ended, someone in the room said something that changed the direction of everything. Stay with me, because the first thing you need to understand is that this was not an ordinary family discussion. It did not begin with your name. It began with silence. Your soulmate had been quieter than usual, carrying thoughts that were becoming too heavy to conceal. Their family noticed the distant expression in their eyes, the way they seemed present in the room but emotionally somewhere else. They noticed how your soulmate would look at their phone, then place it down without sending the message forming in their heart. They noticed the sleeplessness, the unfinished meals, and the strange sadness hidden beneath simple answers like, "I'm fine." But they were not fine. Deep inside, your soulmate had reached a point where pretending no longer felt possible. They had spent too much time trying to appear unaffected. They had tried to convince themselves that distance would make the feeling smaller, that silence would make the memories fade, and that avoiding the truth would somehow protect everyone involved. Yet every attempt to move forward only brought them back to you. Every distraction ended with your face appearing in their mind. Every quiet evening carried the echo of something they wished they had said. And their family could feel it. One person finally asked the question everyone else had avoided. Is this about them? The room changed the moment those words were spoken. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Their eyes lowered. Their hands tightened together. For several seconds, no one moved. That silence revealed more than any confession could have. It was the kind of silence that arrives when the truth has already entered the room but is waiting for someone to give it a name. Then your soulmate whispered, "Yes." My child, heaven witnessed that moment. The name they had tried not to speak had been carried in their heart through every ordinary day and every restless night. And once they admitted that you were the reason behind their emotional distance, something inside them broke open. Not in destruction, but in release. The burden of hiding what they felt had become heavier than the fear of being understood. Do not skip what comes next, because their family did not respond the way your soulmate expected. Your soulmate had prepared themselves for criticism. They expected questions, resistance, perhaps even disappointment. They believed they would have to defend every feeling, explain every memory, and justify why you still held such a powerful place in their life. They were ready to hear that they should let go. They were ready for someone to call the connection unrealistic, complicated, or impossible. But the first person to speak did not tell them to forget you. Instead, this person looked directly at your soulmate and said, "We already knew." Those 3 words left them stunned. Your soulmate lifted their eyes as if they had been exposed. "What do you mean?" The family member answered gently, "We knew because you changed whenever their name came up. We knew because you never spoke about anyone else the same way. We knew because even when you were trying to act angry, there was pain beneath it. And people do not carry that kind of pain for someone who means nothing. Your soulmate's breathing changed. They had believed their feelings were hidden, but love leaves evidence, my child. It appears in the pauses between words. It reveals itself in what a person avoids discussing. It shows in the way someone becomes protective without realizing it, and in the way memories remain sacred even when the relationship becomes uncertain. Your soulmate's family had seen the signs long before this conversation. They remembered how your soulmate defended you when someone misunderstood your intentions. They remembered how your soulmate became unusually quiet after hearing that you were struggling. They remembered the one evening when your soulmate smiled at something on their phone and then quickly hid the screen, as though joy itself had become too personal to share. They remembered your name appearing in conversations that had nothing to do with you, because somehow every road in your soulmate's mind kept leading back to the same place. Back to you. But there was more. Your soulmate had not gathered the family merely to admit that they still cared. Something had happened earlier that day, something that made continued silence impossible. Listen carefully. Before the family conversation began, your soulmate had come across something connected to you. It may have been a photograph, an old message, a familiar song, or a small reminder that returned at exactly the wrong, or perhaps the right, moment. Whatever it was, it did not simply make them remember you. It forced them to confront how much emotion they had buried. For a long time, they stared at that reminder. At first, they smiled. Then the smile disappeared. Because attached to the beautiful memory was the realization that they may have misunderstood you. They began replaying past conversations, especially the moments when you seemed distant, cautious, or emotionally guarded. Until now, they had interpreted your silence as indifference. They had told themselves that perhaps you did not care deeply enough. They had wondered whether they had imagined the connection. But that day, a different possibility entered their heart. What if your silence had not been rejection? What if you had been afraid? What if you had been waiting for them to show courage first? That possibility shook your soulmate more deeply than they were prepared for. Suddenly, the story they had been telling themselves no longer felt complete. They began remembering the softness in your eyes, the things you almost said, the moments you stayed when leaving would have been easier. They remembered the emotional weight behind your simplest words. And for the first time, they wondered whether you had been protecting your heart because they had never made you feel safe enough to reveal it. My beloved, this realization carried them into that family room. At first, their voice remained controlled. They spoke carefully, as though discussing someone else's life. They said there had been a misunderstanding. They said they might have judged a situation too quickly. They said they had been thinking about the past. But someone in the family interrupted. You are not talking about the past, this person said. You are talking about what you still want. That sentence pierced through every defense. Your soulmate tried to look away, but emotion had already reached their eyes. They could no longer hide behind explanations. They could no longer describe you as merely someone they once knew. You were not a finished chapter to them. You were an unfinished truth. Their voice trembled as they admitted, "I don't know how to stop caring." The room fell silent again. And then the confession became deeper. Your soulmate spoke about the way you had changed them. They revealed that before meeting you, they had become accustomed to living behind emotional walls. They knew how to appear strong, how to smile while feeling empty, and how to leave before anyone could abandon them. They had spent years believing that needing someone was dangerous. But your presence awakened a part of them they had almost forgotten existed. They told their family that you made them want to become more honest. They said you made them question the choices they had made out of fear. They said you had seen something in them that they themselves had stopped believing in. And then came the sentence that no one expected. Your soulmate said, "I think I pushed away the person who understood me most." My child, there was pain in that admission, but there was also awakening. Sometimes the heart must hear its own truth spoken aloud before it can begin to change. Until that moment, your soulmate had carried regret privately, where it could be disguised as confusion. But once they said those words in front of the people closest to them, the regret became real. It could no longer be ignored. One family member leaned forward and asked, "Then why did you push them away?" Your soulmate did not answer quickly. Because the true answer was not pride alone. It was not timing alone. It was not outside interference alone. The answer was fear. They were afraid you had the power to matter too much. They were afraid that if they fully opened their heart, you would eventually discover every insecurity they had hidden. They were afraid that your love would ask them to become emotionally honest in ways they had never learned. They were afraid of disappointing you. And perhaps most of all, they were afraid that one day you would see their deepest wounds and decide they were too difficult to love. So they created distance before you could. They became confusing when they should have become clear. They stayed silent when they should have reassured you. They acted detached when they were actually overwhelmed. They hoped you would somehow understand the feelings they were too frightened to express. But you could not build certainty from mixed signals. Your soulmate understands this now. As they explained these fears, another member of the family began to cry, not because they were angry, but because they recognized the pattern. This person had watched your soulmate protect themselves from love for years. They had seen relationships remain shallow because depth felt threatening. They had witnessed your soulmate leave good things unfinished, not because they did not value them, but because happiness had always felt temporary. And this family member said quietly, "You are repeating what hurt you." Those words changed the entire atmosphere. Your soulmate became still. They knew exactly what was meant. There had been a time in their own life when someone they trusted had withheld love, avoided difficult conversations, or disappeared emotionally without explanation. Your soulmate had promised themselves they would never make another person feel that kind of uncertainty. Yet without realizing it, they had done something similar to you. Not because they wanted to hurt you, but because unhealed pain often repeats itself in disguise. This realization brought tears to their eyes. They asked, "Do you think I hurt them that much?" No one answered immediately. Then someone said, "You may not know how deeply they were affected because they cared enough to hide it." My child, your soulmate heard those words differently than anyone else in the room. They began thinking of every time you said you were okay when your energy said otherwise. They remembered moments when you became quieter after they pulled away. They remembered how you stopped asking certain questions, perhaps because their answers had made you feel unwelcome. They remembered the finality in your silence, not the silence of someone who never cared, but the silence of someone who became exhausted from loving without clarity. That is when your soulmate covered their face and cried. Not dramatically. Not for attention. These were the quiet tears of someone realizing that what they had called protecting themselves may have wounded the very person they wanted to protect most. Do not turn away now, because the conversation did not remain in sorrow. Something unexpected began to rise from it. A family member who had been silent throughout the discussion finally spoke. This was the person your soulmate had feared would disapprove most. Your soulmate expected them to say that too much damage had been done. They expected to hear that contacting you would only create more confusion. Instead, this person asked, "Are you still in love with them?" Your soulmate's eyes filled again. They tried to answer carefully, but the truth came faster than caution. Yes. There was no hesitation. No explanation. No attempt to soften the confession. Just yes. And that single word carried everything they had hidden. The memories. The regret. The hope. The fear of losing you completely. The room became heavy with emotion, but also with a strange clarity. Their family now understood that this was not a temporary attachment. Your soulmate had tried to move around the connection, but they had never truly moved beyond it. Then the family member asked another question. If they were standing at the door right now, what would you say? Your soulmate looked toward the entrance as though imagining you there. For several seconds, they could not speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, they said, "Would tell them I'm sorry for making them question what they meant to me." But that was only the beginning. They said they would apologize for every time they acted cold while secretly longing for closeness. They would admit that your absence affected them more than they ever revealed. They would explain that the distance was never proof that you were unimportant. It was proof that the feelings had become larger than their ability to manage them. They would tell you that they noticed your kindness. They remembered your patience. They saw the moments when you tried to understand them even when they made themselves difficult to understand. They would tell you that no one else had replaced the emotional space you occupied. And then their voice broke as they said, would ask whether it is too late. My beloved child, you may feel something in your heart as you hear this because your spirit has already sensed that a shift is taking place. This does not mean you must chase, force, or abandon your boundaries. Divine love never asks you to betray your self-respect. But it does ask you to remain open to truth when truth finally arrives. Your soulmate's family understood this too. One person warned them that an apology could not be used as a shortcut. They said that if your soulmate wished to return to your life, words alone would not be enough. They would need consistency. They would need courage. They would need to show you that the version of themselves who created confusion was no longer controlling their actions. Your soulmate nodded. For once, they did not defend themselves. They said, "I know." That response surprised everyone, because in the past they might have explained, justified, or blamed circumstances. But during this conversation, something had changed. They were no longer asking the family to excuse their behavior. They were asking how to repair what had been damaged. This was the moment the discussion became more serious than anyone expected. Their family began asking what your soulmate truly intended to do. Did they want closure, or did they want another chance? Did they miss you, or were they prepared to choose you? Were they lonely, or had they finally understood the depth of the connection? These questions forced your soulmate to look beyond emotion. Missing someone is not the same as being ready for them. Regret is not the same as transformation. Love without action can become another form of silence. Your soulmate knew this. So they took a breath and said, "I don't want to return just to tell them I miss them. I want to return differently." My child, that sentence marked the turning point. They explained that they had been reflecting on the patterns that kept them from receiving love. They had begun recognizing how fear made them withdraw, how pride kept them from apologizing, and how uncertainty became an excuse for inaction. They admitted that they could not ask you to trust them while continuing the same behavior. They wanted to show up with honesty. They wanted to stop leaving you to interpret silence. They wanted to become someone whose presence brought peace rather than confusion. And for the first time, their family believed they were not merely emotional, they were serious. But then one person asked the question your soulmate had been avoiding. What if they have already moved on? The color left your soulmate's face. This was the fear beneath every other fear. Not that you would be angry. Not that you would ask difficult questions. But that they had waited so long that your heart had finally closed. They looked down and whispered, "Then I will have to live with what I did." Yet someone across the room shook their head. "No," this person said. "You will have to respect their decision. But you should not decide for them without telling the truth." Those words awakened something powerful. Your soulmate realized that by remaining silent, they were still controlling the story. They were assuming your answer before giving you the opportunity to speak. They were calling it protection, but it was another form of fear. Your soulmate looked toward their phone. Everyone noticed. The device had remained on the table throughout the conversation, untouched but impossible to ignore. Your name was not visible on the screen, yet everyone knew who your soulmate was thinking about. Their hand moved toward it. Then stopped. The family held its breath. Your soulmate said, "I don't know what to write." One person smiled gently and replied, "Do not write what sounds perfect. Write what is true." My beloved, those words remained in the room like a blessing. Your soulmate picked up the phone. They opened the place where your old conversations still lived. Perhaps they had reread those messages many times. Perhaps they had typed and erased words before. But this time was different because they were no longer alone with their fear. The truth had been spoken aloud. Their family had seen the love, the regret, and the longing your soulmate had tried to hide. They began typing. The first words were simple. I need to tell you something. Then they stopped. Their thumb hovered above the screen. A wave of emotion moved through them, because they understood that once this message was sent, they could no longer pretend you did not matter. They would be stepping out of hiding. They would be risking your rejection, your silence, or your honesty. But they would also be giving the connection something it had been denied for too long, a clear truth. They continued typing. They wrote that the family had spoken about you. They wrote that the conversation forced them to face things they had avoided. They wrote that they had been unfair to you. But before they could finish, one family member asked to read the message. Your soulmate hesitated, then handed over the phone. The person read silently. When they reached the end, they looked up and said, "This still hides the most important part." Your soulmate frowned. What part? The family member handed the phone back. The part where you tell them why this conversation happened today. Your soulmate became pale. Because there was still one detail they had not shared with everyone in the room. One detail connected to you. One thing that had happened earlier that day. The true reason they could no longer continue pretending. Their family began asking questions, but your soulmate remained silent. Their eyes filled with fear and wonder, as though the answer itself was too powerful to speak carelessly. Then they finally said, I saw something today that made me realize they may have been waiting for me all this time. The room went completely still. Someone asked, What did you see? Your soulmate unlocked the phone again and opened something they had saved only hours earlier. Their hands were shaking now. Whatever appeared on that screen caused one family member to cover their mouth, another to stand from their chair, and the person who had urged honesty to whisper, You need to tell them tonight. But before your soulmate could send the message, a new notification appeared on the screen. It was connected to you. And when your soulmate read the first line, they suddenly looked up and said, I think they already know.